One aspect of Indochina that should attract more study is its economic history, as well as its economic present. There is something in the economic history or present of this place that should be of interest for any economic view. If you're a leftist, then studying Laotian communism would give you an idea about how this works out without the demonization that comes when doing so in the former USSR or Eastern Europe. If you're a statist of most kinds, then you can study the present in Phnohm Penh, including enjoying the blackouts, to see how that works out in practice. But there's quite a bit for fans of free markets and libertarianism to study as well, like this place. You can't get more ancap in real life than this place. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the fourth featured installment of the Khmer series. Alright, so the economic history of what is today Cambodia is a topic that could be a series in and of itself. The geographic location made it so that humans populated this area and traded in it for thousands of years. If you're interested in that, then there's this place in Phnom Penh, which doesn't allow photos and filming at all, but it's arguably the best place one who doesn't know anything about economics could go and get a very fast-tracked crash course on economic history, not just of Cambodia, but economic history in general. It is in this place and this place that attracts the most visitors in terms of economic history, although, if we're being honest, Angkor Wat isn't being explored for its value for the economic history, but for its value as a site for nice pictures to be posted on Instagram. And from the perspective of the current government, it's a great place to exploit for monetary gain. And nothing can stay in the way of making more money off of this place. Not even Cambodian citizens who happen to live here. Every single year there's double-digit increase in ticket sales and, as I was saying, it's not for its economic history, even though that is highly interesting. After all, these buildings are the surviving witnesses of a civilization that managed to exist for several centuries, expand territorially and economically, and all without having to invent the concept of money. The complicated system of barter that they kept all the way till the collapse of the Angkor civilization is one of the reasons why these buildings are kinda off. The architects who knew by the 12th century how to build big beautiful stuff that is not approximate also happened to work on money, which King Suryavarman II, who ordered these things, couldn't provide, because the Khmer Empire didn't work like that. Of course, you're not supposed to discuss this part in these terms, because in the centuries that have passed since then, this place became a symbol of the Khmer nation, and present-day Cambodia even has it on the national flag. And offending the national symbols is a crime in Cambodia. Well, sort of. It depends who you are, really. But discussions of economics aren't exempt from these laws. Heck, money itself is protected by the lèse-majesté type of legislation. A few girls found this out the hard way after they mocked the current Cambodian currency. You see, it's okay to mock the Khmer real by always using the US dollar everywhere and never quoting prices in anything except US dollars, but it's not okay to explicitly mock the banknotes themselves because they have the king's face on them, among other things. It's too bad that the banknote the royals invested the most in just happens to be worth under 50 cents, and it's largely useless, and it's part of the reason why the US dollar is the de facto currency here. In fact, the economic history of this country, especially the more recent one, is multiple iterations of the same story. The government messes things up and the people find a way around that. And in today's video, I want to show you a very extreme living example of a segment of the population finding a way around government's bad policy, the segment being a part of the country's Vietnamese minority. So, Welcome to the Vietnamese floating village. This place is often lied about, mostly for political reasons, and becoming more open to tourists has merely shifted the direction of lying and mixed it with the superficiality of the tourists themselves. Admittedly, this move is great for the Cambodian government, which has been trying to tear this place apart for decades. Having some pampered Westerners writing nasty stuff was one hell of a boost for the Khmer government's attempt at gaining public support to further harm these people. Yet the story of this place is not just one of resilience and ability to thrive in face of astonishing adversity, but also a story of how the pursuit of happiness can work and yield results even when explicitly denied. It started from a small seasteading of ethnically Vietnamese stateless persons decades ago, and today the area has two villages, Kampong Phluk and Chong Knes, both on this huge lake named very creatively Tonle Sap, which means the Great Lake. There are also two other villages like this one on the other side of the lake. The more the government tried to tear these apart, the more they grew. Being part of the Mekong River system, this lake has a very high biodiversity, which means there's stuff to sell. And being on the Mekong River, stuff can be shipped not just in the rest of Cambodia, but all over Indochina, all while being able to avoid the trappings of the land shipment. This may not be so excessively important today, but it was crucial to the survival of this place during the Khmer Rouge. The project was so successful that nowadays the Vietnamese no longer hold the majority here. So, a little background story. Despite saving them from the Khmer Rouge, more on that in episode 6, Cambodia's thank you response was to basically ban ethnic Vietnamese from owning property until 2020, even from getting any job. The response to that? Seasteading. Over the decades, other excluded marginalized groups joined in, such as the Cham Muslims, the evangelical Christians, renegade Thais, and of course, poorer Cambodians. The floating villages are still known as Vietnamese to this day and still hold distinctly Vietnamese names, but they're no longer majority Vietnamese. Between a third and 40% of the populace is Vietnamese, and contrary to what is found on the internet about this place, the settlement is now heavily extended on the ground as well. How? Well, mixed marriages. Vietnamese aren't allowed to own land, but their children and their Cambodian spouses are. So, little by little, over the decades, they bought more and more land, and now the place is no longer one of poor outcasts, but in fact quite a rich place. Of course, the government doesn't like that because you can't tax people who don't exist or localities that legally don't exist, like this place. Also, something that doesn't exist not only can't be taxed, but it can't be regulated either, which means the products made here, and increasingly not just fish-based stuff, doesn't carry VAT or custom duties, thus allowing even poor people to stay competitive on an increasingly globalized market. Again, keep in mind that Thailand is just a bit upstream on this river. Ancapistan for the win. Well, in a way. Most Western reporting focuses on the poor people in this village, and yes, there are quite a few poor people, but fail to mention that those represented an increasingly tiny minority until 2018, when the Khmer equivalent of the deadly phrase was heard. What is the deadly phrase again? I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Phnom Penh tried really hard to convince as many people as possible to move on the land using Western-imported safetyist ideology and good old-fashioned abuse of power. It seemed to work, at first, but there was one problem. You could bully people to leave, but you can't force them to stay on land, especially since so many of them are quite literally born on a boat. So most of them establish businesses related to transport on water or work for an existent one. And then there's also the problem with the next generation. The government claims the children aren't being educated, but the same government doesn't allow the children of the Vietnamese to attend public schools because they're not legally citizens. But they worked around that too. They built their own schools, their own medical clinic, and when I was here, they were expecting their first big generator so they can no longer be bullied by the government with electricity. One of the selling points of relocation was that they'd get subsidized electricity, but only if they sign up to move to a place where they don't hold a title to their land and can be evicted by any schmuck who claims to be the landlord. That's what happened in 2018 and 2020. The state tried to forcibly relocate this place somewhere else. In 2018 under the excuse of preserving biodiversity, and in 2020 under the excuse of preventing communicable diseases. When we say that public health is an arm of illegitimate and/or authoritarian rule, we don't say it in order to be edgy on the internet and get clicks. We say it because it's been proven true time and time again, and it will continue to happen for as long as public health is accepted as if it's the legitimate purview of the state. Needless to say, as the footage shows, these people aren't big fans of it. During the 2018 relocation process, families were required to pay for the cost of moving and rebuilding new homes. Unlike the relocation site nearby, where their Khmer neighbors were sent, which has a wide, smooth, red dirt road, the relocation site given to the ethnic Vietnamese has a potholed and uneven dirt trail, hindering vendors as they push their carts down the bumpy path. Other relocation sites for ethnic Vietnamese in the province have also fared poorly in areas vulnerable to severe flooding and without proper infrastructure. To put it bluntly, the government made everything worse, which should come as no surprise, yet we're supposed to pretend we're shocked. And after decades of trying, the Cambodian government might finally succeed this decade. The official reason is climate change, yet another Westoid safetyist story. The actual reason is government incompetence, or as some people here might argue, bad faith. The localities that developed on the opposite end of the lake from the floating villages have been allowed, or some would say incentivized, to dispose of their waste into this lake. Collaborative research by the Institute of Technology of Cambodia said more than 234 tons of feces were discharged into water sources daily, and 77 tons of it was discharged in the lake every day. That is a lot more than all 4 floating villages could generate, but despite the government's own numbers, the official story still remains that it's climate change and the community's own terrible waste management that is causing the problem. The problem being, of course, the lack of clean water. Now, somehow this didn't happen and wasn't happening prior to 2018 when the government's latest ideas started being implemented. But if you say that, Phnohm Penh will accuse you of being a separatist and Westoid NGOs will accuse you of some sort of ism. Even so, these people still won't give up easily. When I was taping these images in late 2023, the chat was hush-hush about building their own waste management facilities that would absorb even the pollution created by government policy. 1 year later, the project was slowly catching life. Will it work this time? Well, it's hard to tell. But then again, this community has seen worse odds and not only survived, but grew. And it remains a fascinating case study because every single expert and commentator for the last 40 years lambasted the existence of this community and/or predicted its demise in a matter of years. The Pol Pot regime almost succeeded, but they came back from that too. Currently, it's being critiqued by both Western visitors and by the government in an exercise that tells us a lot about everyday people's drive not to leave others alone. And it's also quite weird how no libertarian or ancap was ever interested. This place has everything the ancaps preach. It's a non-violent, it's voluntary, it feeds millions of people, no income taxes or regulations, religious and ethnic tolerance, capitalism, peace, tranquility, fierce mentality that it is on you to get better and that others, especially the state, don't owe you much. It has private toll roads, it costs $20 just to get in addition to the cost of moving around the place if you don't own your own boat, and of course, it has widespread disdain for the state. It's true, they don't smoke weed, they hold socially conservative views and are not down with progress at any cost, so I suppose that kinda disqualifies them in the eyes of classical liberals of Western extraction. Or maybe it's because the place doesn't look cute? Millions of dollars have been spent on advocacy and policy papers that pontificate on seasteading. Millions more have been spent in the last 7 years in an attempt to create one, including one in neighboring Thailand in 2019 near Phuket, which was gone in just 2 months. Meanwhile, these villages have been around for over 50 years. Say what you want about them, and there's plenty of legitimate criticism too, but they have passed the test of time in a way no techno-optimist Western libertarian attempt has. I'm sure this is inconvenient to some, but one's worldview should start from reality. Now, before wrapping this up, it needs to be said that one of the reasons this place continues to exist is because it's in Cambodia. The rest of the country is allowed to own land and is given citizenship all right, but most of the land is a minefield, and I mean that literally. And while the demining efforts have become quite impressive, it is still the case that the majority of medium and small settlements can't develop due to mines and other unexploded ordinances dating from either the Second Indochina War or from the confrontation with Pol Pot and his henchmen. So this almost uniquely harsh climate, combined with the relatively constant incompetence of the administration, particularly in economic affairs, has quite literally bred a country of natural libertarians. You see, at the beginning of the video I mentioned that you're not allowed to mock the national currency, the real, but that doesn't stop the country at large from quoting everything in US dollars. Again, the government has been trying for over 20 years to convince the populace and the foreign investors to use the Khmer real, but to no avail. The median age in Cambodia is 26 years old, which means that to most people, the US dollar and defiance of government economic policy has been the norm throughout the entirety of their lives. It's even worse with the elderly, who have seen the state fail twice in their lifetimes. So good luck convincing those of the virtues of a bigger government. Now, that's not to say that Cambodia is some libertarian paradise. It really isn't. And in the next episode, we'll delve into how governance works in this country, and libertarian is definitely not an appropriate adjective. However, this is to say that the socio-political and historical context in what is today the Kingdom of Cambodia did help create a type of generalized thinking about governance that is not exactly common or easy to replicate. This situation is described by fancy people and political science experts as hysteresis, a term borrowed from physics and natural sciences which refers to the dependence of the state of a system on its history. In internet jargon, it's a case of very hard times having created strong men. And the results are nothing short of spectacular. It's not uncommon for poor countries to grow at very fast rates once they solve what's keeping them down. But Cambodia has been staying on very fast rates of growth for 30 years now, to the point that this footage, taken just 14-15 months ago, may already be too old. The rate of development is indeed remarkable. A reality which is also proving the point that libertarians routinely make. An incapable government isn't always a bad thing, and in fact it can routinely be a good thing. The current autocratic elite simply can't govern over the economy, as the de facto dollarization makes any socialist impulses very difficult to implement, unlike neighboring Vietnam and Laos. There is, of course, a trade-off to this. Unable to enact its will through economics, the government resorts to other forms of graft, and corruption is at levels nobody can fully describe. But that's the story for the next episode. Until then, There's one more thing to be said on economics. Cambodia is one of the quite numerous middle-income/developing countries with a median age far lower than the West, with a growth rate far higher than the West, and with healthier demographics. They won't all succeed, as the CCP-inspired panic porn tends to claim, and they won't all fail, as the Westoid think tanks like to reassure themselves. But by the end of this decade and throughout the next one, they will all keep on trying because they all have the demographics for it in a way the West doesn't, which makes them interesting not just from a knowledge and wisdom perspective, but also as investment destinations. One way or the other, the economics of Cambodia will be more dynamic and more permissive than all of Europe. It remains to be seen if it can be more innovative too. Maybe not, but that won't stop them from trying. But to see how, or if that is possible, we'll have to study the governance of this place, which we'll do in a few days in the next episode. Until then, thank you all for watching, many thanks to our members, and if you like this kind of thing, please do consider becoming a member and support the next series. At the moment of this recording, we're preparing a second part in Central Asia. Once again, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.